Hello and welcome back to another Bannerlord video. Today I'm going to be showing you 10 features you may not have noticed from the footage that we have been provided by Tailworlds. You may already know everything on this list, however it's my intention to get as much information to you guys as possible before Bannerlord is released. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first of these 10 features is a change in the combat mechanics. Now, as you may know, in Warband, group fighting was a massive part, and if you were good at taking on multiple enemies, you were highly respected in the community, just as much as if you could beat people in a one-on-one situation. In Bannerlord, they're adding another combat mechanic which will make group fighting with two-handed weapons a little bit easier, and it will also add another skill level to the game. Now, this is actually being able to hit multiple targets with one swing with a two-handed weapon. Not only is this a brilliant feature, it's also a very realistic one. For example, if you're swinging your massive two-handed sword, it's going to cut through your first enemy, and the momentum from that first initial swing is going to carry on to the next enemy. However, if that happened in Warband, the next enemy would be fine and he would live. However, in Bannerlord, it's going to cut through the second enemy, allowing you to pull off multiple kills with one swing. Now, there are a few things that I'm still in the dark with this. Now, I'm not sure if you can actually hit more than 2 people with one swing. It could be 3, 4, maybe 5, but I think that would just be ridiculously overpowered. They will have to balance it, especially for multiplayer. The second question that I'm raising from this is that will it work with one-handers? Now obviously in a one-handed swing you're going to have a lot less momentum than you would in a two-handed swing. Now this could mean that you can only chop through one enemy and not 2. And I think that would make sense. If you do know anything about this, make sure to leave it in the comments below. I'll be very interested to find out if this will apply to one-handers as well. The next feature I want to talk about is structures on the single-player map. Now, as you may have noticed from the single-player footage of the map that we have been given, that there are no castles at any point during that footage. Now, I did a little bit of digging around and I actually found out why this is. Now, basically, when you're given a fief, you don't just have to make it a village, some little shitty farming village. You actually have numerous different options. Now, the first option you have is to develop it into a castle. Now, that obviously requires resources. Now, resources, I suppose, could be obtained by buying. Now, if you remember in Warband and you went into a village, they had like bits of wood and that kind of thing that you could buy, but they didn't really do anything. Maybe in Bannerlord, those bits of wood and materials could actually help you build a castle. Now, the castle option isn't the only option. You also have the option to build a wheat farm. You can also build a clay mine, a salt mine, a date farm, a flax plant farm, a spice plant farm, a sheep farm, a stable, and a step stable. Each one of these developments will have its own unique product, and obviously the villagers from the village will actually take that product and sell it at the local towns. Obviously, depending on what you're actually producing will depend on the price that they get, and then that will also affect the overall revenue of that village. Now, during times of war or before times of war, enemies can actually intercept these villages, and that will impact the whole economy of the other faction. Now, I believe each individual development's build time and resource cost will depend on its revenue output. So basically, the more money it's going to produce, the more resources and build time it's going to cost. Now, I presume you cannot build fiefs from scratch. They're actually spread out on the map in designated places like they were in Warband. Because the balancing issue with this is that if you were allowed to place your own fiefs down, you could just surround your home settlement with castles and it would just be a little bit overpowered. And I think the balancing issues with that would be too big. If you had many fiefs that produced, for example, step horses, I think it would be very nice for you to equip your whole army with those step horses. Now, I think this should only be applicable to items that you produce through your farms, because I think if you could do this with items that you've bought, it could become very overpowered. Also, on the previous screen, we can see just behind the overlay at the front that it actually says at the bottom, morale each day. Now, I presume that means it can produce morale each day, and it also says 0.0 militia each day, implying that thieves can actually produce militia for your army. And also at the top it says the village's income, which we talked about earlier. The next thing I noticed was a very small thing, however it could be debatably interesting. Now, in the bottom left of the screen you can see 3 little options. You can see a pause button, a play button, and a fast forward button. Now obviously in Warband the play and the pause button would have equated for you stopping on the map and also moving around on the map. Now I presume that works the same way in Bannerlord as we've seen it through the footage. However, it also allows you to have a manual pause and play mechanic, which is nice to have. I'm not sure how much I'll actually use it though. The next thing that I really want to talk about is that fast forward button. Now we know the fast forward button speeds up the game like we saw in Warband. However, in Bannerlord, speeding up the game and time in general will actually have a direct effect on your character. I did some digging around and investigated the speeding up of time, and actually found out that it could have some drastic effects on your character. For example, at the end of one of the developer blogs, it said we will talk about how character aging works, along with some other effects of time moving faster. Overall, it's a very nice thing to add in, and a very clever thing to add in as well, because it's very simple and very effective. So this means that when you're moving time on at a faster rate, you're actually going to age. Now obviously, aging could have some direct effects. For example, you could become weaker, however you could also become more knowledgeable, and you could also be more persuasive. Overall, it's a very nice thing to add in, and a very clever thing to add in as well, because it's very simple and very effective. Something that you may have heard of before is that Bannerlord is going to be including a barter system. Now this involves you being able to trade items for other items or even prisoners. Now there's also a mechanic in this barter system that allows you to trade fiefs. Trading fiefs can be more useful than you can imagine. For example, say you go to war with another faction, and then another faction declares war on you. You could offer some of your own fiefs or maybe some captured lords to the faction that has recently declared war on you, and that could allow peace to be made. As you can see, the barter system in itself is fairly self-explanatory. On the right hand side you can see a list of things the player can offer towards the deal, and on the left hand side it shows what the player can demand from the other party. There is also a satisfaction meter in the middle, and this basically demonstrates the other party's willingness to accept the deal, and it's also a key indicator for the player when putting together a barter offer, as satisfaction changes as we add and remove items into the offer. The ability to be able to barter for absolutely any item on the map is absolutely phenomenal, and I cannot wait to see that in the game. The next feature on this list is something that I personally have really enjoyed. As you will know, Warband's music was particularly good, and it gets stuck in your head and you recognise it whenever you go into the single player game. However, in Bannerlord there is some really nice music being featured. Now each faction has its own individual music, and I think it's found in each tavern. Say you go into a Battanian town, you have its Battanian music, and if you go into a Valandian town, you're going to have Valandian music. Now I'm going to play you guys a short part of the Khuzait faction's music. Now hopefully it's not copyrighted, but we'll find out. I'm going to risk it because it's just too amazing for you guys to miss out.
The final result.
If that's not the music you want from Bannerlord, I'm not sure what you want. I love that. It is absolutely amazing. The influence point system is very interesting indeed. Now you can actually spend these influence points to persuade other lords to do something they wouldn't normally do. Now you are able to gain these influence points by doing certain tasks for that lord. You also get them if you're a high ranking noble. Now I think there's going to be other ways of gaining those points that we haven't been told yet. However, I think this feature is particularly brilliant because you can change events that just wouldn't normally happen without spending these influence points. Now I expect there's going to be a certain influence point cost for certain actions. For example, if you're asking a low rank lord with few men in his party to follow you, it's going to cost a relatively low amount of those influence points. However, if you're asking the king of the Battanians to declare war on the king of the Valandians, then it's going to cost a lot more influence points, just because it's very unlikely that that king is actually going to listen to you. Now in Bannerlord there are a lot more options for sieges. For example, you can parley. Now parleying is when you and the other faction actually can meet together and discuss the terms of the battle. For example, you could say, hang on, let's just not fight today, let's go off and continue our lives and forget this whole thing ever happened. Obviously that's not the terminology they will use more official and Bannerlord specific terms, however it's along those lines. Now I believe there's going to be some other options for parleying, and I believe one of those options is that the attacking lord can ask for the defending lord to actually leave his castle, leave all their weapons behind, and basically not let the fight happen, let the attacking team take it peacefully, and we can all move on. Again, not using that terminology, it will be a little bit different and said a little bit different. Another option may be that we can take it to the field and not actually fight within the castle. You can actually fight outside the castle or in another location. Again, the options for this are quite varied, and I'm not really sure what they're going to involve, as we haven't really seen anything from it. However, we do know that it exists. Now, building on my previous point is that the defenders have the option to sally out. Now, this could be particularly effective if you have a lot of cavalry. Now, we were shown this in one of the Bannerlord siege demos, where actually the cavalry within the castle charged out of the main gate and headed for the battering ram. Now, obviously, they took out all the units around the battering ram, hopefully disabling it so it couldn't attack the castle. Now, sallying out could involve everybody from the castle leaving and attacking the enemy team on the ground, or it could involve just the cavalry charging out, eliminating one of the siege weapons and coming back in and fighting off the remaining attacking forces. I like this because it adds a further variety to sieges. You don't have to attack in one way. There's many options for the defenders to defend their land, and many options as well for the attackers to attack the castle. Now, something was pointed out to me the other day by a fellow friend and YouTuber, Ragnosis. His channel will be in the description. He makes a lot of persistent World Mountain Blade videos which involve huge factional wars, etc, etc. So basically, he had noticed that the Calradia Empire, which is one of the factions in the game, was split into 3 different empires. Now, that was the Western Calradia Empire, the Northern or Southern Calradia Empire, it's one of those two, and the Eastern Calradia Empire. Now, I'm not sure what this means, whether they're going to be individual factions, or maybe one of the Calradia empires is more powerful than the other Calradia empires. We're yet to find out. I would expect them to have similar units, if not exactly the same units, and they may even be friendly towards each other, and it's just a way of describing the Calradia Empire, for example, West, East, and South. However, having them separate names and separate ideas, instead of having just the Calradia Empire, makes it a little bit more interesting, and it might be a further development in the single player story. Now, the last thing on this list is describing more the multiplayer than the single player, and that is the map size. Now, you may know that the maximum map size is 225 kilometers. Now, I'm not sure if that's going to be a killing computer map size, or it's going to be a relatively well optimized map size. However, 225 kilometers is absolutely massive. Now, if this map size could be included in some sort of open world mod, or even some multiplayer mods in the native game, it could be quite interesting. If you would like to know a little bit more about the map size and the open world possibilities for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord, make sure to check out my video, which will be in the description, where I describe and look into the potential open world mod for Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Now, in the video title, I said 10 separate things, and I have listed 10 separate things. However, I feel like I need to add in a few more things that you may have heard of, but you may not have heard of as well. Now, the first one is that there's going to be gangs in the towns. Now, we saw this in the 30-minute gameplay footage at PC Gamer, and it basically shows a gang of people that I presume you can run yourself, or you can actually attack and eliminate, especially if it's your own castle. Now, these gangs, I presume, will steal stuff from the markets and that kind of thing, and that will influence the amount of product that the castle actually has. And that will also affect the amount of caravans that come, because there won't be as much produce for them to take. So basically, it will affect your castle's revenue overall, and it's best for you not to have them. In Warband, you must remember having the really annoying times in single player when your men would only face the enemy. Now, this was really annoying, especially when you were being attacked by cavalry, as they would often get couched from behind. Now, the way Bannerlord has affected this is they've actually changed it so they don't always face the enemy. You can actually choose where they face. Again, this is another feature that couldn't really be in the main list, but it's a very small one, and I thought I'd include it at the end. The last feature I'd like to talk about is sea battles. Now, these were actually confirmed by the developers in a 4chan interview. However, I don't think we'll see them in release. I think we'll see them added potentially as a DLC, or maybe later on in an update. Whether this will be in single player or multiplayer, we just don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Now, if you would like to think about the multiplayer prospects of Bannerlord in a little bit more detail, make sure to go ahead and check out my previous Bannerlord video. It discusses the game's multiplayer options in a lot more detail, including co-op campaign and that sort of thing, so make sure to go and check that out. So guys, I think that will wrap it up for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I personally have enjoyed making this video a lot. I've delved back into the Bannerlord archives and into the videos and tried to discover as much as possible so I can translate some hopefully new information to you guys, as many of my previous videos haven't brought too much new information to the table. However, hopefully today I have solved that. Make sure to hit the like button if you did enjoy. It does help me out a lot because I get to see how much you guys actually enjoyed it. And also make sure to hit subscribe if you are new. We are so close to 7,000 subscribers. It's absolutely insane. We're growing so quickly. This community is growing even further. And I'm still in shock just how quickly it's growing. And I'm just blown away. As many of you will know, December is approaching and that means it's getting close to Christmas. Now, hopefully in December, I'm going to be uploading every 2 days and maybe even every day if I can. Now, it's going to be a massive task for me, obviously, because I have a lot of work to do and all that sort of thing. However, I'm going to try my very best. However, in order to do this, I'm going to need some more video ideas. So I would like to see as many video ideas in the comments down below as you can possibly come up with. It would be much appreciated, as I can't always come up with very good video ideas. Anyway guys, that will end it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check the description for all the links you could possibly need. Like and subscribe. And thank you for watching and have a brilliant day. And I will see you in the next one.